We mentioned last time that there were 7 gedolei achronim who point to the murex and they say that that's Techeles. And although they never saw the murex, but it's definitely a very fair and reasonable ashara, very logical link between them, since you find in all the ancient writings that at that same time they were dying with the marine creature that was the murex, and that very same time Klal Yisrael were using also the chilazin, which was a marine creature, and they were dying there at Techeles. And not only that, but it was also in the same area. The Pliny and Aristotle write that it was basically in the northern part of Eretz Yisrael, where they would, in Sar and Sidon, in that area, in Tyre, where they would have their industry of dyeing. And the same with Klal Yisrael. Chazal say that it was between the Sulma, the Tzura, and Haifa. So logically, to link them together makes a lot of sense. And as a matter of fact, this very same logic was the basis of almost the whole thesis of Rabbi Herzog. And he himself connected them together, and he came out and he says that it seems to be that the murex is the most mistabridika candidate as the chilazin, since you see like the basis that we just saw, that they're in the same area, same time, same place. However, this was all until Rabbi Herzog actually came up and met the murex trunkless. As soon as he saw the murex trunkless, he dismissed it. And he said it's not shayach. Because Einochinami al Pisvara and Asharas Balma, it makes sense. But we have to go with what Chazal say. And he goes and he lists through all the Simoni Chazal. He gives them A, B, and C, and V'chulu. And he says now one of them kemat shtims with the Simoni Chazal. And then he says also that not only did the Simoni Chazal not shtim with the murex, but he says that also the Rambam, we have the Rambam to go with, and the Rambam seems to say that the color of the Techeles on the tzitzis is like the sky blue in the mid-afternoon. And he says, and this murex only produces purple dye, so that also doesn't shtim. That taina, he wasn't so, he said he would live with it. There are shittas that say that it's purple, but it bothered him. Now this last taina, they discovered in the 1980s that it's not shver, because they were able to take a murex, and if you expose it to the sunlight in its reduced state, we saw that it could produce a blue color. So mitzad that, it wasn't shver, but the Rav Herzog dismissed it and discredited for many other reasons. It didn't shtim with any of the Simoni Chazal. So therefore it's very reasonable and most probable that these 7 achronim who never saw the murex, they would have as well rejected it once they've seen the murex and seen that it doesn't shtim with none of the Simoni Chazal. And like we said, hardly if any of the Rishonim shtim with them, they probably also would have also have rejected it. Now this is all in general as far as these 7 achronim are concerned. But if you take a close look up at these 7 achronim, you zero in. I don't mean to mamish be ma'ayin in it, but just to look it up in the source, because many of the supporters, these 7 achronim are either misquoted or they're taken out of context in many cases. And sometimes they'll even bring down one half a sentence and not bring down the other half. So none of these 7 achronim are whatsoever a raya once you look up close. And as a matter of fact, in some of them, it could be proven the opposite, that they were not referring to the murex, they were referring to something else. We mentioned already the agvourim, and the other one was the Chavas Yor, one of the gedolei poskim, printed a sefer in 1702, the beginning of 1700. He makes a statement. It's an isolated statement without any discussion about it. And he says, Shenase midam dag shenikra purpur. He says that the Techeles is made from a dam of a purpur fish. Pashas referring to Aristotle, that talks extensively about the purpura as the murex. And so therefore, they bring this as a raya that the Chavas Yor clearly said that the chilazin is the murex. Now, Einochinami, at the time that the Chavas Yor lived, they had already rediscovered the murex trunkless, 15 years before that, before his time. In other words, we saw that in the mid-800s, when all the dyeing factories got demolished, about about 850, they say, the Lulayas Techeles brings down one of the strong supporters of the murex, says that it was basically an extinction. No one ever came up with a murex since then for the next good few hundred years, until 1685, when we saw that the Englishman William Cole rediscovered the murex trunkless and figured that you could dye with it purple dye. But it's not mistaber that any of these achronim knew about that discovery. As a matter of fact, for the next 150 years, until the mid to late 1800s, no one ever linked together that discovery of the murex to the purpura that was referred to in Aristotle and in Pliny. So therefore, it was just a discovery on its own. Think of somebody discovering a fish 20 years ago. I don't think anybody would really hear of it unless you're a marine biologist. So stands to reason that the Chavas Yair probably never saw it. And chances are that had he seen it like a Herzog, he probably would have rejected it. But not only that, but if you look at the Chavas Yair, a line before that, the Chavas Yair says, "Shetzeva dam chilozon, shemimenu tzayvim atcheles." The color of the dam chilozon, and therefore the color of the tcheles on the tzitzis, einoi blue. It's not the color blue. Ela tzeva purpur. It's tzeva purple. It's purple color. Now he doesn't say where he gets that idea from, that he holds that it's purple. But he says, "Ayin in my chidushim," and we don't have those chidushim. So if he found some makar that some reason he holds that tcheles is purple, it could be, and very reasonable, that was his makar for why he was accepting of the fact that it was the purpura which was able to produce purple dye. But had he been masking that it was blue, maybe he would have never even done it in the first place. But the supporters say that since the Chavas Yair is one of the gedolei achronim, you can't just machavek a goy, you can't machavek the Chavas Yair, you have to take the Chavas Yair at face value. And if the Chavas Yair says that the chilozin is the purpur, so then that's what you have to go with. Now, I find that very bothering for two reasons. First of all, like we just mentioned, the Chavas Yair himself says that the chilozin is purple. Now, to start cherry picking in the Chavas Yair and say, I'm accepting that he says that it's the daga purpur, but the big line before that where he says that it's purple, to reject and say, no, we have a Messiah, the Rambam, and it's light blue, that's something that if you're going to accept them at face value, you got to take the whole Chavas Yair. Number two is that some of these same supporters, when it comes to the Rishonim, which none of them seem to shtim, their answer is, you have to understand that the Rishonim never saw the murex. They never saw the chilozin. So you can't expect them to know anything, what it is. They based themselves on stiris and chazal, and they gave a teretz, and it comes out certain ideas. He says, and they say, so maybe Taka they didn't know, and Chalila, maybe they made a mistake. So to say that the Chavas Yair, we have to take him at face value, even though mistaber that he would have rejected it, but when it comes to the Rishonim, there we say that had they seen it, they would have not said what they said, and they would have definitely have accepted it. That's something that I can't accept. This is as far as the Chavas Yair is concerned. They bring down a Rabbi Ya'akov Amdin, a Yavitz, who lived at the later part of the 1700s, printed in 1768, and he brings down in Sefer Mitzpachas Sforim, he brings down from the Chachmei Umas Ha'olam. He says, "U'kadover hazeh mamish kosu seifrei Umas Ha'olam," and his passage referring to Aristotle and Pliny and obviously others that we don't have because of certain ideas that he says. But what he brings down is the same exact svara, and he says since they write that there was a dyeing industry in that area of Eretz Yisrael, and we know that Chazal say that from Sulma to Sur to Haifa, he says it's ganz mistaber that's what the chilozin is. And so therefore the supporters bring a raya that the Chavas Yair is another one of the achronim who hold like that. And not only that, but in the Siddur of the Yavitz, when he comes to the parasha of Shema, Vayomer, and he brings down the chilozin, speaks about the chilozin, he says that it's a choymet yami. That means it's a marine snail. It's a snail that's in the water. So it's very clear, they say, that he refers to it in this Mitzpachas Sforim as what they used in the olden days, which the ancients wrote about. And he says that it's a choymet yami, it's a snail. So ganz staber that he holds that it's the murex trunculus. Except that Mukhayra, if you look inside the Yavit, you'll see that for 2 and 3 reasons, it's obvious that the Ya'Yaakov Emden is b'chlal not talking about the murex trunculus. Number 1 is that the Yavit in Mitachas Forum, right over there, he says that this snail or this marine creature that Chazal say that used for the chilazin was exclusively in the chelik of Misulman and Survat Chayf. You will not find it anywhere else, he says. He says, Ubizman Yishver Tzola Yekol Matumatim, Ulizvulun Levada Miyeser Ashvatim, and he says earlier, Ki V'zochu Shloi Nimtze B'mochrim Acher. You'll never find it in another place. Hadag Shetzayvim B'domei Tcheles, Ki Im Ben Shnei Mekoymet Halalu. He says the ancient writers write like that this is only between here, and he says that as far as the Brachot Zvulun was, he holds it's only between these 2 areas. So therefore, the fact is that the murex trunculus is found not only in Eretz Yisrael, but it's found just about everywhere in the world. It's found in Spain, in Portugal, in Morocco, just to list a few, and many, many other places they found the murex trunculus. And therefore, if the Ya'Yaakov Emden was referring to it, and he says that it's only between these 2 areas, it's obviously that he wasn't referring to that. So some of the supporters say, no, that's not what the Ya'Yaakov Emden meant. Of course he was maskim that you could find it anywhere in the world. But in Eretz Yisrael, that was exclusively a bracha to Zvulun, and that was exclusively, the Gemara says, between Sulman and Tzur and Haifa. But Enochanami, it's not a steer that you can find it in other places of the world. However, that's also factually not true, because even in Eretz Yisrael, they found many digs much more south of Haifa in Tel Dor, and much more south of that. They found many digs, tremendous with excavation. They found tremendous piles of murex trunculus all over Eretz Yisrael. It is true that they're much more concentrated up in the north, and the reason being is because the terrain of the coast of the northern part of Eretz Yisrael is much rockier than it is on the south, and these snails and many other snails apparently feel more comfortable living between rocks, so you will find it more. But to say that it's exclusively there when they found millions and millions of snails and piles of them much more south of there, it's obviously that Pashtus he wasn't referring to the murex trunculus. Second of all, if you look again in the Chadash Yoyer, if you look again in the Ya'Yaakov Emden, he says an interesting thing in another part of the Mitachas Forum, and he says Hachilazin is beria shebayam b'dom mitzayim Techeles, and he says v'hu bal chayim sogor ben shnei klipos. He says it's a creature that's between 2 shells, 1 shell on the top, 1 shell on the bottom, which in English that's not called a snail, that's called a clam. 2 different things. Then he says also an interesting fact. He says, this is also seems the Ravid brings this down like that, not the Ravid on Nasogis. And it's also brought down in Aristotle, the exact same thing. We know that there's a tzemeach, which is a plant, and there's chai, there's something that's living. And he says that there's areas in between these 2, which is very gray area, and they could both be considered like a growing, like a living thing, but also it's like a plant. And he says the chilazin is one of those things. It has movement like a chai, but he says it's noutz v'tokua b'karka. It's rooted into the ground, and it's almost like you have to rip it out to get it. And he says, and that's this chilazin that the domei tzayvim Techeles. Now that doesn't match at all with the murex. So obviously, the Yavitz was not referring to the murex trunculus. He's obviously speaking about something else. As far as what the Yavitz says in Siddur, he says it's a choymet yami. That means, sounds like he's saying that it's a snail. So you have to say one of 2 things. Either you have to say that choymet he refers to as a snail, but he means it has a shell, but he means it's 2 shells. and what we call today a clam, which is not a snail. Or you say that he had a chazara. He originally thought one way and then he changed his mind. The siddur was printed 23 years before Mitzpachas Farim. So if there's any chazara in any direction, it's not going to be from assuming that it was a clam to assuming that it's a snail, but it's farkert. Originally he might have assumed that it was a snail, and then 23 years later he wrote that it was a clam between two klippas. So, B'hanach Sin V'Salkina, we still have to get to the other achronim that Hashem will get to tomorrow. But as far as the achronim that we saw until now, in a very general term, it's clear that had they seen it, they would have been chayzer, because same reason Rabbi Herzog did, because it doesn't meet up with any of the Simani Chazal. And second of all, when you look up closer into these achronim themselves, you see that they weren't even referring to the murex.